These are 4 things you didn't know about EQ. Understanding these ideas will help you improve your workflow, discover new creative techniques, and make more informed decisions in the future. Chapter 1. Phase Response. You likely know already that most ordinary EQs cause phase shift. One way of understanding this is that applying an EQ band will cause tiny timing differences around where the band has its biggest slope. These are usually barely audible, but there are certain scenarios where they can matter. In this graph, they're represented by the purple line. The frequency response is the green line. Now, these timing differences are inherently linked to the difference in frequency balance an EQ makes, the effect we are usually after when using an equalizer. One interesting consequence of this is that the phase response of opposing EQ moves will also be exactly opposite. They cancel each other out perfectly. You might consider opposing EQ moves to be pretty pointless. After all, it'll result in a neutral frequency response. However, this can become more interesting once we place some kind of nonlinear effect in between the two. For example, here I'm using 2 linked EQs to drive a saturator differently. As you can see, the phase and frequency response stay unaltered regardless of where I've moved the linked bands. Without saturation, this will make no difference in sound. The sound of the saturation, however, will change depending on how I use emphasis de-emphasis EQ on this respace. You will be able to hear quite a clear difference. You can also use 2 linked EQs with opposite frequency responses to bias certain devices, like for example this loud split. Depending on how I set these EQs, it will analyze different parts of the frequency spectrum as the loudest. This can help when, for instance, we're trying to tame a resonance in a specific frequency area. There is another scenario in which this correlation of phase and frequency response will help us, but more on that in Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Linearity. All clean digital EQs are linear. This probably includes your stock parametric EQ and also something fancier like Pro-Q, Kirchhoff or AP equalizer. Now when I say EQ is linear, I mean a different kind of linear to the term linear phase. The two are not related, so it's important to be aware of the difference. Let's take a look at the mathematical definition of a linear transformation and translate it into audio words you're more familiar with. A linear transformation is a function f, for which multiplication a times f of x equals f times a of x, and addition f of x plus f of y equals f of x plus y. In EQ terms, this means it makes no difference whether you turn a sound up or down before or after the EQ. And it also doesn't make a difference if you apply the same EQ to 2 sounds separately and then add them together in a bus, or if you add them together first and then apply it to both sounds together on a bus. Let me demonstrate this in my DAW using Bitwig's EQ+. Here I have 2 tracks in a group. I'm going to apply the same EQ to both tracks individually, and then I'm going to copy the group, remove the 2 EQs from the separate tracks and just add 1 EQ with the same settings on the group track. If I invert the polarity on one of these groups, we get a perfect null. Applying a clean digital EQ on individual signals or on a group leads to exactly the same results. This can have a lot of workflow implications, however, because of course EQing in a group in one is a lot faster than EQing all individual tracks and also more CPU friendly, since we only need 1 EQ calculation for the group instead of 1 for every track. Complicate matters a little. Let's say I have 3 tracks in a percussion group. I want to apply a 5K and a 2K boost to 2 of the tracks and just a 2K boost to the other one. There are 3 ways we can do this. One is by placing 3 EQs on separate channels and applying our boosts. Another option is adding a 2K boost on the group and a 5K boost on 2 of the individual tracks. And maybe most interestingly, we can also just add a 2K and a 5K boost on the group and then simply pull 5K down on the track where we don't want the boost. This will cancel it out again, and once again all 3 examples have the same frequency response, meaning they are practically identical. Now that was quite a lot of theory. What does this mean in practice? Well, it means it can make sense to first EQ a group to get some general tone shaping going, knowing that you can still cancel it out by ear if one of the many tracks in the group doesn't need it. Working this way can be a lot more efficient than trying to EQ every individual track first. Another thing related to the EQ's linearity is the old cutting versus boosting debate. You may have heard of this before. A lot of old school engineers were taught that it's better to cut with an EQ than to boost. However, for digital EQs this doesn't really matter as long as you compensate the gain changes you made. Let me show you a simple example. I can either turn the highs of the sound down with a high shelf by 4 dB, or boost the lows by 4 dB and turn the total sound down by 4 dB. This yields exactly the same result. All that matters is the EQ curve that is being applied. Once again we can see in the DAW that the null is flawless. Some curve shapes, however, are usually easier to achieve by either cutting or boosting. For example, we can dip a bell or add a high shelf and a low shelf and turn the makeup down for a very similar result. But if one of these involves 3 steps, the other just 1. If we want to boost a bell, the reverse is true. One psychological advantage of cutting over boosting is that you might simply forget to gain compensate your output. In the heat of the moment, this is likely to happen sometimes, and it might bias you towards certain EQ moves simply because the sound is louder, not because you actually prefer the filter curve, so it might still be a good habit to try cutting first. Although rest assured that if you do ever feel like boosting with an EQ, there are no fundamental downsides to it. And of course it's also important to keep in mind that most, but not all EQs are linear. The two main kinds that are not are dynamic EQ, because they base their processing on the incoming sound, and analog modeled EQ, because they recreate the subtle saturation and non-linearities of their hardware ancestors. Here the incoming volume of the EQ and whether you choose to place it on a bus or in individual tracks can make quite significant difference. Chapter 3. Ear training. This third chapter is the least technical, yet maybe the most important part of this video. You probably underestimate just how precisely you can EQ purely by ear. Some people speak of being able to learn to pinpoint a frequency with up to 1/3 of an octave resolution, just by ear, no sweeping around or looking at a spectrum analyzer, but immediate recognition. Needless to say, this level of ear training would make your EQ decisions way faster, precise and more intuitive. But how do you get there? Well, years of practice, of course, so let's start small. The first thing you should probably learn is to recognize the broad frequency areas, whether an issue is in the low mids, highs, air, etc. Most people get here just by working on music for a while. You might already be at this level. The next thing I would recommend you do is that you turn off the spectrum analyzer in your default EQ preset for a number of reasons. Firstly, you will be forced to properly listen to the sound, work by ear and pay much closer attention to what you are actually hearing. You might find it slightly uncomfortable at first, but you will quickly get used to it. Secondly, we as humans are unable to separate our senses. A popular example of this is the McGurk effect, a phenomenon where which sound people hear depends on what video you show them.
Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba.
Both of these videos have the same audio, yet many of you will not have heard it that way because her lips move as if she made 2 different sounds. Try rewatching it with your eyes closed. What we hear is inevitably influenced by what we see, and what you see on the spectrum analyzer can often be deceiving. Who is to say that our ideas of how things are supposed to look on it are actually correct? The listener will only hear the sound. It's best we learn to just go with our ears by default and only switch to the analyzers if we have a specific reason to do so. Thirdly, the spectrum analyzer often doesn't even show the audio that is being played. As we discussed in chapter 2, we might already have placed an EQ on the bus that changes the final frequency balance of our track, yet our EQ on the individual track doesn't know this, so the analyzer is showing us a balance that we never actually hear. So really, I would recommend you turn it off by default. If we want to get closer to the accuracy of 1/3 octave by ear some experienced engineers claim to have, it will probably take you a long time of daily practice to develop that kind of skill. Additionally, you might want to supplement your time spent in the DAW with a dedicated tool for practicing frequency recognition. There are many apps out there that allow you to practice your frequency recognition, and I've made a video in the past showcasing some of them. When you feel it is time, you might want to seek those out. Now enough psychology, let's get back to some sound design. Chapter 4. Ringing. EQ changes the frequency balance of our sound, and as we saw in the chapter on phase, this is kind of inherently linked with timing. One interesting audible consequence of this is the ringing caused by EQ. Let's send a single sample impulse, the shortest possible sound, into our EQ, boosting 1.02 kHz with a bell with a very narrow Q. You can see blue before the EQ and orange after the EQ. We can see that all of a sudden, our single sample impulse has grown a tail. All EQs ring a tiny bit, especially when used with very narrow Q values and high gain amounts. This is a perfectly natural, even desirable effect, and for lower Q values we really needn't worry about it. As you saw in the example using a minimum phase EQ, this tail usually occurs after the incoming sound. In a certain way, there is an asymmetry around the point in time that caused it. Linear phase EQ preserves the phase, or the relative time placement of your sound, by instead having a symmetrical impulse response around the input sound. This leads to a phenomenon known as pre-ringing, a kind of fade into our sound that is identical to the ringing fade out, just reversed. You can see how in a certain way this is more true to the time placement of our sample. It is just spread out in both directions equally. In another way, however, this can affect the perceived rhythmic placement of a sound, which mostly depends on when exactly it starts and weakens its transient. This can become especially apparent in the lower frequencies, where it can soften the attack of, for example, a kick drum. This is why many people actually prefer to use minimum phase EQs here, because the sudden start of the sound is preserved better. They both have their ways of messing with the timing of the sound, and it really depends on context which is preferable. Now the main reason I talk about ringing here is that it can be used to our advantage for sound design purposes. You heard how the EQ kind of introduced a pitch to the sound, so why not tune that EQ and play it like an instrument? Just send in a short blip of sound and turn it into a long ringing tone. The short burst of noise I send in becomes the mallet, striking a resonant EQ like a xylophone, and we've created an instrument. That's it on EQ. I want to end this video with two short little advertisements for stuff I've been working on you might be interested in. So one thing is I've finished a course on every one of Bitwig's audio effects. You can see I recorded a lesson on each here, including how I would use them, how they work, how I combine them with modulators and with each other. Sort of some longer, some shorter. You can just watch these out of order depending on what you're interested in. So if you want to learn more about Bitwig, want to learn more about the effects that come with it, you can take a look at this course. And then also I've become available for private lessons. So if you want to learn about anything in particular, if you need help with a mix, getting a grid patch to work, if you want to figure out some sound design stuff, just want to learn about stuff, want to ask questions about anything, you can book a lesson with me and we'll see if we can figure it out for you somehow. So yeah, these two things are both linked in the description, and that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Bye.